Welcome to the Voice Creativity Podcast. Today's episode, we have Aki, one of the co-founders of MarketMuse. MarketMuse is one of those companies, one of the first companies that uses machine learning to parse things that we all view as purely creative, maybe purely not quantitative. It's really fascinating to hear how he thinks, how he's working on that project, and what else he has in store for us. So, without further ado, here's Aki. Aki, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Really great to have you on. Longtime friend, first of all, but also founder and president, I believe, at
Yes,
MarketMuse,
yes.
um,
Former CEO.
which former CEO and president at MarketMuse. The title's getting longer as the days go. That's awesome.
Former CTO, actually. Come to think of
That's true.
CEO, now president, whatever.
I remember I originally got that wrong because I was like CTO, CEO. But you've done a lot of things at MarketMuse and otherwise. There's so many cool things we can talk about. I think the audience here, of course, likes hearing about creativity and meeting cool people who work in creativity. And everyone has a cool, unique background. So in your case, you might be one of the first technologists, as we just heard, CTO, CEO, people who, executives at a tech company that focuses on a creative topic. So I think that's a cool angle we can dive into. Um, and just so everyone knows, I'll do a short summary of Market Muse. You can tell me how wrong I am. So just so the audience is there, Market Muse is a platform that does content intelligence
Mhm.
specifically around SEO. Is that
Mhm.
is that
Yes.
ballpark?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we use AI to optimize content and to help you plan content, what to write, how to write that content. We even now can generate the content through AI, but basically AI software to optimize your content so that it performs better in search, you drive more leads and build better awareness and realize ROI from your content efforts.
Awesome. That's killer. So obviously, I know a bit about Market Muse. We've connected for many years on this topic. It Market Muse kind of like dovetails philosophically with Cortex. But for the people who don't know, I'd love to just dive in a little bit about Market Muse, where it came from, how you thought of it. What the kind of life cycle has been so far, just so people who are listening can kind of familiarize themselves. Do you want to start there, like how you came up with the
Yeah,
idea
yeah,
originally?
it's good to get some background. Basically, my background is in AI, data analysis, machine learning, big data. I was at a consulting company where we worked with Fortune 500s and we helped them get insights and intelligence from their data. And that really excited me because like if you look at, for example, the war, like how would you win a war today? It's intelligence, it's like cyber stuff. It's not like, how many infantry troops you have moving on the ground. It's like, where are they going? And what are they doing and what are their capabilities? So it is all about data and analysis. And so I got really excited about that. I was at a venture fund for a bit, OpenView. Then I worked at somebody else's company for 2 years where we made a database that analyzed large amounts of data. And then I had that kind of idea like, geez, it'd be great to use AI to solve like a real world business problem. And I actually started working in healthcare first for the first 5 months. I was looking at healthcare systems. And it's something that I continue to
I don't think I
be
knew that.
passionate. No, yeah.
Secret background, even I'm learning. I love it.
Secret background. Yeah, it was just interesting because I wanted to help society. I only wanted to work on things that help society in some way. But like after 5 months, a couple of my mentors sat me down. They're like, "We love that you want to do this. Do not do this right now." Like regulatory, shifting, quote unquote, Obamacare had been passed, like to Affordable Care had just been passed like 2 years ago. It was like a mess. They're like, it's your first company. You don't know what you're doing. Like you're gonna like starve, etc. So I was like, okay. They're like, no, no, just do something else, and then later you can go back to like helping fix the healthcare system, which turned out to be sound advice. My other passion was content, and because kind of in the realm of ad tech and martech and different ways to get visitors and leads and prospects to your site, content is the one that's educational because like ads are interruptive, but content you learn something. And so by using, and my thought was, well, let's use AI to optimize it. By using AI to like make our the content more informative, it just it's like wittingly or unwittingly squeezes more information into like people's brains and makes the world a smarter place. um,
Which we could definitely use right now.
yeah, so I thought that would be, that would be cool to that would be a worthwhile endeavor. And so that started a journey of 8 years to where we are today, and we're not, not nearly at the end of it. In fact, we're still at the beginning in terms of, like how many people do you know who use AI to optimize their content? Maybe a couple, but not like 100. you know?
Yeah, between you and I think we know all of them. Like that's our job, right?
Yes.
So yeah, and it's not even the majority at all. It's the minority still. So I
Yeah.
completely buy that. And obviously, Cortex comes from a visual background, but you guys, from what I understand, and this is pulling from like 5 years ago, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of were one of the first ones that at least I was aware of that kind of like decoded the knowledge graph, right? You kind of pardon me for if I summarize poorly, but you kind of were able to use machine learning to kind of almost like reverse engineer how Google thinks about concepts. And
Correct.
that I think you and I first chatted about that like a networking event or something, but like there was a beer involved. But I remember it being like, oh, that's a huge breakthrough because it seems like if you can understand how Google itself kind of like where it places a topic, then you
Mhm.
can understand, truly how to move, SEO and how to affect how Google thinks about, your topic and you and your kind of
Yeah.
placement there. Is that still right, or was that ever
Yeah,
right?
that's still right. So the history on that with the which a lot of people also don't know is that in 2011, I think Google bought a company called MetaWeb that made a semantic database called Freebase that it just was like basically these computer scientists analyzed Wikipedia and connected the dots between the different articles and topics. And that created a
Clever.
database of like what relates to what, like dog is an animal or pet or whatever. And so this was this big database, and Google bought it, and then they connected it to their search engine. And then a few years later, in 2013, I think, we had already been working on this independently for like 6 months. And then one day Google came out with like, hey, now the search is powered by the knowledge graph. And they didn't, frame it up in that way, but that's exactly what they did. It wasn't announced in that way, but we could see that that's exactly how their system worked. So Google ranking on Google, became all about covering topics comprehensively and what topics have you covered on your pages and what do you focus on in your site and your content clusters. Like all of that became the way to rank. We had been independently working on it because we just thought it was like a nifty idea. Like, oh gosh, we could make articles better if it had more information in it. That would be a good thing. But then it became real, and then that went on to basically create a new industry around optimizing your content for comprehensiveness, also for Google. It's kind of like a side thing. For some people, it's the main thing. Some people, it's the only reason they would buy software. They're like, yeah, whatever, I just throw in keywords. But the reality is, like, it's creating a content strategy is something that it really takes a lot of human synthesis. There's data points and there's like things, but you don't just like drop in keywords into an article. You actually write it
Not anymore.
in a comprehensive way because Google will detect that too. So like it
That's right.
really just speeds up your expertise. Yeah, and so now years later there are a lot of companies in that in this space.
That's awesome and fascinating. And hilariously, while you were talking, a couple neurons connected for me. In our space, right? Very closely related space, so not that they're different, but in visuals, in kind of more advertising, visual focused space, a big thing that everyone's talking about is the privacy changes that just went through because of Apple, and the fact that a lot of people are opting out, and then therefore targeting's not working, et cetera. And I actually view that in this change in this period we're in as kind of like equivalent to the period you just described for search. Because if you think about like the history of search, it used to be like extremely gameable, and then a little bit less gameable, and then a little bit less gameable. And now what you're kind of describing is like Google has done a pretty decent job at actually kind of, the Venn diagram of like what works on Google and what works to educate a person about a topic are like very closely aligned now, right? Whereas
Yes,
before it was like, before it was like keywords, then it was like, who do you link
keywords.
to?
Yeah.
It's like there's all this kind of like ancillary stuff that had nothing to do with whether the human on the website was learning anything, or whether the topic, the content of the website, pardon my dogs, was even remotely relevant. Um, and now, like they've done a better job, kind of just like making that the same thing. Like if you do a good job informing people and educating people, that also, in general, I think improves your SEO. And I think in our world, it's kind of similar, right? Like until very recently, literally weeks ago, you could put a steaming, picture of a steaming pile of trash, and you could target it correctly and put enough budget behind it, and it would find people, and it might work, right? Of course, but actually, realistically, from our perspective, um, when trying to entice someone to take a look at your product or service or whatever it is, actually providing them some sort of interesting value is what we should be striving for,
Yes.
right? We trying to entice them genuinely, right?
Yes.
Give them in our case a video or an image that is compelling, that they actually enjoy, rather than relying on the gaming the system and creepily following them around the internet until they give in, right? Which has basically been the modus operandi for most everybody until quite recently. And so I think,
Yes.
interestingly enough, a lot of people I think are very down on marketing technology, and like it has this weird um like reputation that it's like
Mhm.
this big brother thing that's happening. But actually I think like the world is moving toward, like, I think your space in particular is kind of like leading the way, but the world is moving toward like better content winning, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, yeah, like one, I mean, I'll give you an example or two stories here. There's a famous researcher in Canada that does a lot with machine learning, and and I tried to get an intro to talk to him, and he didn't want to take the intro because he's like, he said he views marketing as like psychological manipulation, to get people to buy your product, which is the negative view, and there probably merits to that, and we probably are manipulated often, of course. But on the other hand, the example that I like to think about personally, I mean, we don't really use it in sales calls because nobody cares about some of these like advanced concepts. They're just like, can it hit my goal? But what I like to think about is like, I grew up, I was born in Hungary. Hungary is a post-Soviet country. Like in the Soviet Union, you did not have markets or customers, you just had suppliers. And you when you look at the quality of life difference in the US, you had like toaster ovens and microwave ovens and whatever, and all of that stuff was much less in the Soviet Union. Of course, it was also not a priority to spend on consumers, more military spending, and of course they had less money. But one thing that you do have here is you have this culture of the consumer, and the consumer is an educated consumer. So essentially, when you create content, you're teaching your market how to buy your products. You're teaching them like what questions to ask, what questions to ask your people, what questions to ask the alternatives, what are the differences. It's like an education process. And one thing that in the US we're much better at than my relatives in Hungary, we're much better at buying things here. We're much more
Huh.
better at researching it, at like thinking through it, much more nuanced. What are the, not just brands of, that's always a big one, but like, what are the features of the thing? Where do I go? Should I find this on Amazon or like Alibaba or whatever. Like there's a whole process to buying things, and by creating content, you're educating your potential customers how to interface with your business better.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really cool way to put it. I've never actually had heard anyone say that, but that is absolutely true. And in fact, to kind of play that back in my world, like if you envision a lifestyle brand of some kind, like the Ritz Carlton, or some really high end luxury brand, right? They're of course doing lots of things when using visuals. They're making you desire to be there. They're making you aspire to have a life like that. There's a lot of things happening, but actually one of the things they're doing is they're kind of telling you what to expect in a product like theirs, right? And so it's almost like,
Mhm.
the not, in text you're actually communicating in ideas, and visuals you're communicating ideas, but of course differently, usually with less or no text. But in one way, if I see a video and this beautiful, model couple walking through this resort, right? One of the things I'm taking in is what a resort like that should look like, and like the bar for my next resort trip, right? If I'm going to aspire to something, I'm going to want a beautiful bar that hangs over the ocean or whatever I'm seeing, right? And so that's cool, and it's a cool way to think about it. I've never actually turned it around that way in my head. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you mentioned a second ago that like a lot of people on sales calls, they're looking at, a KPI or something. They're not really
yes,
like into the philosophical discussion behind it. What
of course.
KPIs are they, for MarketMuse? What KPIs are they asking about and are like important to them? And what are you guys focused on like moving for them, if you can share that?
Yeah, typically, honestly, most of the time, they're top of funnel metrics. So, like, how many, what keywords am I ranking for? What position am I ranking in? And how many people, come to this site? That's typically the most kind of tangible thing that people start with. But after a while, they start to realize it's really about the quality of the leads and prospects, the relevance. So you could even get much less people to your site, but if they're much more relevant, they're going to convert better. Then you start thinking of like kind of conversion rates, and say, how much sales pipeline does this actually generate for me? And so those, and basically that's like how it pays back, right? Like the idea is that by spending a little bit more money and time to optimize your content, you drive a lot more relevant. You focus deeper, you drive more relevance. Those leads, are more likely to turn into larger deals and actual money. And then that pays. So typically our customers see like depending on the quality of their execution, which I'll talk about, but it's like a 2 to 5x lift that they see through
Yeah.
MarketMuse. But we've had customers that have seen 15x return, 100x return for one customer. But it really depends on how well is the data interpreted and acted on, and like how many resources are brought to bear for content. And when I say content, one difference between, because we share a lot of similarities, but one difference between us is when I say content, I specifically mean long form text articles for SEO. And the other forms of content, of course, are images, social media, news, videos. Like, we don't affect any of those channels. But, in order to make use of this product, you need to have at least one typically full-time content writer or an outsourced team that it's like writing text day in day out, and then you have to have some sort of editorial function. It's either you or somebody on your team, but like somebody has to evaluate the writing and all that. So it's a channel, but you're optimizing that channel. But it's kind of like, instead of walking everywhere, now you have a car, and so you can not only get there faster, but you can also like you know
Bring-
carry heavy things that you wouldn't be able to. It like opens up a lot of avenues.
That's awesome. So you touched on something there. Is it right to say that the kind of like ideal customer, someone that can kind of maximally benefit from MarketMuse, is a company that has at least one full-time content writer? Is that a good proxy?
Yes, yeah. People
Are
can, like, one part time might do it, but to be honest, We have products. Over 10,000 free users. Like we have free products. Actually, I think it's actually over 20,000 now free users.
Nice.
Like even if you have someone writing content, one article a week, you actually can get value from MarketMuse. But where we bring most of the value is where if you have at least one full-time, a lot of the smaller startups, like a startup, like if you look at our organization, we have one full-time content strategist, and then we have a couple of people who like contribute or help out or are engaged, and that's kind of a good, like for a Series A, Series B startup, that's like a good spot to be. And then if you're a smaller business, maybe you just have like someone part-time in the Philippines or something. That's okay. That's okay too, but it'll be scaled back.
Nice. Okay, so there are kind of solutions you guys offer for freemium, that kind of thing, all the way up. That's
Yeah,
cool.
we do. Yeah, we really kicked that off. I had to correct myself because for 7 years, 6, 7 years, we didn't have that. And then last year, we really kicked it off during COVID. So
Oh,
now it's
nice.
like a brave new world. Even my brain is adjusting to. But yeah, like now it's easy because you can just go to marketmuse.com, sign up for free. You can do like 7 or 10 queries. We're changing it to 10. I think we're going to change it to even higher than 10, but like some number of queries, and it runs you through a tutorial, and like it's you could just kind of see the software play out.
The sidebar, I don't want to get too into it, but it sounds like if you're offering something that is effectively like the cutting edge, right? Like AI that does this and knows this and can do content strategy, you're kind of on the bleeding edge of what I think people are aware of, as being possible. Is the lift when someone shines up freemium style? Is the training and the lift and the kind of getting them in the right mindset? Is that hard? I would imagine the reason I ask is I would imagine a lot. We see this as well. A lot of people arrive on your website not knowing that what you do is possible, probably.
Yes.
Um, and so getting them to like understand, make a kind of like a pretty significant mental leap as to like, okay, software can know this stuff. And then another leap, which is like software can help me with this stuff. That's like two pretty significant, kind of like steps they need to take. And to get someone to do that, kind of unguided, not with no kind of like someone on the phone walking them through it, kind of themselves on a freemium sign up seems like that's got to be tough.
Yeah, look, nothing is easy, but I think people have an intuitive ability to understand what software does, and they have a surprising, challenge with explaining what software does. And I know this is not just us because years ago I met the founder of Dropbox, and he's like, look, he's like, the reality is, he's like, because in the first 2 years, I think he was in Boston and then he moved to the Bay Area with Y Combinator. And he's like, in those first 2 years, it's like when he was meeting, customers and investors, he was trying to explain what Dropbox like is. And it's like, he's like, well, it's like a file sharing solution that takes the best of rsync and, SFTP, but it's also, and they're like, people are like, I don't know what you're saying. But then when you see like what Dropbox is, it's like, oh, it's a thing, and you click on it and things like sync and I can share it. Cool. Like after that, it took off. So I think it's
So
very
showing
hard. Yeah.
sometimes is more powerful than telling.
So much
Uh,
more. Yeah. So much more.
okay, I totally buy that. In fact, that kind of jives with
Images.
what Cortex is saying. Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
times. Okay, so that's cool. And so another thing I noticed. So obviously, we've been friends for a long time, and I've been following your company and vice versa, and we're kind of like on a similar path, philosophically, I think, as the market goes. One thing I noticed when just kind of refamiliarizing myself with your website and your kind of assets recently is like you guys seem to be talking about content creation velocity now.
Yes.
Is that something that you hear a lot? Are the customers coming to you kind of either asking to increase that or complaining that they're not making enough content, or how do they? That's kind of new to me. I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, well, we noticed over the years that our most successful customers, in fact, the vast majority of our customers double or triple the cadence of their content publishing through MarketMuse. Like they'll start using us, and then a few months later, they're like knocking out 3 times as many blog posts. which is interesting because the AI doesn't necessarily, the AI absolutely speeds you up. Yeah, so, okay, I'll put it this way. The AI makes the process of writing the article a little bit longer, right? Because you're not just like writing down like your thoughts and then hitting publish, but you're writing down, checking, editing, validating, rechecking. There's like a couple of extra editorial steps. But then it takes the next phase out. The next phase is when you spend hours wondering if you did a good job or not. Like, and you're like, what else is in this topic that I didn't think about? And, like you've got a bunch of FOMO. Without AI, you have a bunch of FOMO. With AI, like those hours are gone. And then also there's another, we have a solution around content planning, which is like, which content should I be writing in the first place? And that takes weeks and months to do. And that's like, one click in the thing. So in MarketMuse. So it really does speed up the whole process, although not the way people think. Because in the beginning, it looks like more work.
Yeah, oh yeah. No, and yeah, that's I think that's common to a lot of software actually. Like, and in fact,
Mhm.
interestingly enough, not to crap on another person's work, but if you're familiar with Superhuman, the email
Yeah,
app,
love it.
um, yeah, I like it too. But I think it takes a very interesting take that I don't think is the smartest. It 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 appeals to what people think they want, right? Which is like faster email, right? But actually, it's kind of biting off the like little pieces on the end, like how long did it take you to to click something in the past? Oh, we've keystroked that, so we've saved you half a second here and there, and it does, as a user, it does feel a lot faster, and you can totally streamline things. But it's just like, I actually wonder if like I often find that the software that kind of changed my life the most are working on kind of like what you're talking about. Like MarketMuse isn't making, like typing faster, for example, right?
Hmm.
It's not like
Yeah.
we're doing what we did before, just faster, right? Actually, the smart part is saying, we really weren't doing, we weren't really sure what to do, and we spent a lot of time wondering what to do, and therefore we never really acted with conviction and like just took a list of things and just banged them out in an efficient way, and we didn't know how to do them, right? And what you guys are doing is like sorting all that out and just being like, here's a bunch of things you should write about in
Yes.
exactly how you should write it, and now you can just get to writing, and you're not making the writing faster, and even as you said, you might be making it slightly slower, but you're making the output to dramatically more pieces of content, right? So
Yeah.
you are increasing the output velocity, or I forgot the phrase you guys used, but which
Yeah.
is cool.
Which gets back like to your original question. We thought we were impacting efficiency or ROI of content, but we end up surprisingly also end up increasing content velocity like quite a bit. So it does end up being both. But yeah, we didn't expect that. But I mean, to your point, I agree. Like the older and more experienced probably that I get, and the more that I do things like this, I find that I'm doing less. Like I'm making less decisions. I'm making less moves.
100%.
Like I'm making a lot less
Fewer,
moves.
better moves.
Yeah, fewer, but they're like really thoughtful moves. The ones I
Yep.
do make, they're and when I make a not thoughtful move, I feel it like in the value of my Bitcoin. At the moment, I'm like, the time I chose to enter the market was not thoughtful. So like you just see those losses. But when I work with other people, sometimes I notice that like they're doing a lot more stuff and they're like doing like a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I'm like, no, 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 I'm only going to do like this one little thing, but I'm going to like go all the way and like drive it to completion, and then I'm
Completely
done
do
and
it.
I'm never going to look at that again. And next thing I'm going to do that. It's like being methodical and strict plan. That. And so the funny thing about content strategy is people want more. They want more leads and prospects and they want more pipeline. Cool. Then they think, well, I'm going to do it by like shooting out a bunch more articles on a bunch more topics. You actually end up reducing the number of topics in almost every case. You reduce the number of topics. You really focus on your key differentiation. For us, it's like AI content optimization, AI content strategy. Like we're not going to rank for content I mean, content means like 8 different things. We don't want to rank for content at all. Like that would be like a huge, like, it lead
And
to so much confusion in our funnel.
yeah, even if you did that, that's the point I was going to make. Even if you did, you know, 7/8 of that is not the right content for you, not the right leads for you
Yeah,
anyway.
we'd be wasting
So
our salespeople's time. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, and so that gets back to your whole, using your, eating your own dog food, basically. You guys know with MarketMuse or otherwise that it wasn't a spray and pray, get more leads via covering more stuff. It was go really, really deep on the things that are really high intent for you and
Yes.
bring the right people for you and do that all the way down and make
Yeah,
sure you're
and
the
cover
number.
like every conceivable aspect of it. Like if you go on our blog, we have over 250 articles. It's really, really technical about like user intent profiling strategies I mean, it's like things that most people don't even know exist, like user intent profiling. Most people have almost nobody knows what it is actually. But like if you're in this space, and that's what I like. That's the value I get from Superhuman is like whatever best practices are ever devised in email, they're going to build it into their thing, and I don't have to worry about like before Superhuman. I used to use like Boomerang so the emails bounce back, and I had this other thing called SaneBox that filters it out and blah. And I use like a bunch and the follow up things and whatever, and then we use the other thing that's like I forgot what Yesware and like Salesforce connector, like all this stuff. But Superhuman just builds everything in, and then like you just don't have to worry about it.
That's a really good way to look at it also. Yeah, you're subscribing to the company, not just for what it can do today, but like these guys are smart and are thinking deeply on this one problem that takes a lot of your and my time, email.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that if I just gonna like put my trust in email solving in them, and then that way over
Yes.
time, even if they don't do what I want them to do now, I bet they'll do it later. Is a cool way to look at it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's been
Um,
cool. It's been really cool, and we can switch to another topic. But as I
sure.
step back from like that CEO role to like working in the company role, it's been really cool to kind of like take my learnings and apply it to like doing one job instead of a managerial overseeing like a bunch of jobs. Because like when I do one job, I'm much more efficient, and I can like we can take things really far with just a couple of like key strategic, like I call them sniper shots. Like you actually don't need any infantry to win the war. If you just have one sniper shot to the general whatever leading, then it's like, well, that's over. And that's the ultimate efficient use of data and insight is just to make one little beep, and then that unlocks this whole chain reaction, and that like figuring that out is really fun.
That's cool. I love that. And so now that the new role, can you tell us about your new role that you said you kind of like narrowing your
Yeah.
focus? What are you focused on these days?
Yeah, well, it was a fun, interesting transition, and we started last November, so and then now it's June, so we're still kind of transitioning, I think. But basically, so when I started MarketMuse, I was the CTO because I was writing all the code and stuff, and I was working with a scientist, Richard, but basically he was like giving me advice and writing a little bit of the code, and then I was just like building the whole thing and running the engineering team and like doing all that stuff. And we did not have a CEO. And then because I just, I wasn't a CEO, like we just didn't have one. And then my co-founder came in, and then a couple of years in, like a year or two, he and our board member asked me, they're like, well, we actually now do need a CEO. You should do that job and just like, do all the selling and manage the sales team and raise funding, which I was already doing, and build the company and all that. And so last November, I mean, we're in MarTech. I'm sure you also were affected by COVID. What's the first thing that, companies pause in a pandemic, recession is marketing spend. So we saw a lot of declining, budgets and just locked up budgets. Like they just the money was there. They wanted to do it, but they just couldn't get approval because the CFO didn't know if that money could be spent or whatever. So there's a lot of that stuff. And we're in content, which is very long term. So it's easy to shut off in a crisis because, like, whatever, think it's short term. And we're in AI content optimization in MarTech, which is like definitely the first thing you're going to shoot. That's one thing you can take on your budget, the optimization of a long-term thing that you don't really care about, So, so we saw a lot of like, challenges, but we also used the opportunity to launch our self-serve and our freemium and whatever free trial, and we have the ability for people to just play with it and then pay us later once there's some value. So we did all that, and that was a big transition. And so there were a bunch of transitions last year. And when we got out of the crisis and we're on solid footing, we were having a kind of like a leadership meeting, and we're like, we're like I see a path out of this now. Great. And we had our, so there's this gentleman I brought on by the name of Chuck Freidenborg, and Chuck was like this great general manager, and he's great at like leadership and company building. And we're kind of like, that's kind of like what a CEO does. And what am I good at? Like analyzing stuff and like, I don't even know, building product focus, building stuff. And we're like, maybe we should like change the job. So I got the president title. So this is a very long-winded way of answering your question. But in terms of founder transitions, this is one data point for anyone, considering or having gone through it. And so we're like, okay, well, actually the skills to make a great CEO are general management, leadership, and company building. So bam, you got the job. What job do I have? Well, we first started out with like partnerships and agency sales and building an agency model. And those were all things like I was doing, but then we're like, well, we could also like hire partnerships people. Like we only do like a couple of partnerships a year. So that wasn't like a fully, good place for me. And then Chuck had the idea, why don't we focus me on internal, like intel, like product intel, customer intel, kind of like, I can romanticize it by calling it like the CIA, of MarketMuse, just like, the intelligence function and like, what is our data actually telling us and what should we do? And so I've been doing this kind of internal product role, and it's been great because it's customers, how can we make our customers more successful? How can we make our product better? And like, where should we be like placing our bets? And it's very like kind of advising the leadership team by just the only criteria is everything must be through data. Nothing can be subjective. It must be objective data. And if we don't have the data, we have to collect and gather, create the data set somehow. But we must advise our business decisions. So it's kind of like BI with some strategic, but it's been really really great. And we just had a presentation this morning that was like there's that, like you were saying, but when your neurons connected, it was like like there's like the one missing piece, and everyone's like, oh, that makes sense. And it's like, yeah, that was in our data the whole time.
So your goal is to find those and share them with people, basically. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's my shtick.
Chief aha moment generator. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay. So are there other things you're working on these days, like side hustles, or are you? Do you have it sounds like maybe you've got the crypto bug as well.
Yeah, I've had a couple of recent financial trading bugs, and all of them were like dramatically unsuccessful. But I'm not giving up. I just had a couple of really, ideas that didn't work out in a row. So I'm, although significantly diminished from where I started the year, but I'm not giving up. But I think
were those stuff, can you share those ideas? Was that like AMC GameStop style?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Nice. Startups, biotech companies, like penny stocks, SPACs. I had like these strategies for SPACs. A little bit of crypto, which obviously way too late, way too, like any kind of bad idea.
Not financial advice, but you should hold.
Yeah, I know. No, I know. I'm kind of like halfway joking, but when I've had to learn like not to feel bad when the, portfolio value drops significantly. So, just kind of that. And then I'm also working on a couple of different ideas, because I've realized that what my passion and what my strength is basically like seeing ideas that would be cool and would have some value, and then I can like actually build like an early version of it. So just seeing like something that could move the needle for society and financially and commercially, and product, improve productivity, and then actually like having like, oh, here's a V1, does this, do that, and like I'm doing that. So I'm kind of, my friend who's a serial entrepreneur, he calls it entrepiting. He's like, what does an entrepreneur do? You untrip it. So you untrip it here, you untrip it there.
The
So I'm
verb
like
to
entrepiting.
entrepreneur. Yeah. That's cool. I
So
like
I've
that.
got, I'm working on a trending. So for example, one of the things I'm working on specifically is a trending um, analysis kind of approach, because what does MarketMuse not do is we don't analyze anything that's popular. We say, don't worry about what's popular, focus on what's relevant. So what's on the other side of that coin? Let's focus on what's popular and not relevant, I guess. Or maybe relevant and popular would be even better. But like, some sort of analysis of trending information. I'm kind of researching that right now. And it just, and there, I wouldn't be shocked if there's ends up being a dovetail with MarketMuse, of course, but I'm starting it off just like independent research, and then we'll see where it goes.
That's cool. Yeah, I was gonna say like uh Market Muse shares that kind of feeling with Cortex. We're like really shouldn't try to, whipsaw the company around the content creation team based on like, whatever's trending at the moment. That's tough. So I kind of buy that. But actually, I mean, there's absolutely a lot of strategies there on the marketing side as well as elsewhere that, you know, when there's enough momentum behind something, as we've seen in the financial markets recently, right? Meme stocks are called that for a reason, right? People get behind them and it literally moves markets. There's a lot of stuff
Yes.
that actually, right? And the interesting thing that I think they're going to write about the GameStop AMC thing in the future dramatically, but it just seems like it starts as a meme. It starts as this is trending and it's not really relevant or whatever, but actually it becomes relevant, right?
Hmm.
It totally changes everything. And like in the case of AMC, just recently, they used that momentum and that kind of inflated price to raise more capital
Raise money.
and
Yeah.
de-risk the company. And now they're going on the offense theoretically, and they're going to acquire more locations and they can put growth back in the company from something that seemed like it was an internet meme at first, right? And you
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
okay, so maybe the
Yeah.
tail is wagging the dog. So if you build something, if I'm understanding you correctly, if you build something that can kind of like analyze the wagging of the tail,
Mhm.
then when the tail does wag the dog, or that works as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly the thesis. I mean, Elon Musk is really good at like writing this stuff, because like who was talking about Mars 10 years ago? Like nobody, not that I know, not even NASA. Like it was like
Yeah,
not
right.
a thing. And then
Yeah,
one day, apparently, like he was taking a flight back from Russia, and he started like doing math, like thinking about like how much like rockets cost, because he was trying to like buy some rockets, and it was like
he's
really
trying to
expensive.
buy
Like, yeah,
ICBMs from Russia so he could just buy
yes,
the rocket part. Yeah.
yeah. And then he's like, I could probably just build this, and then that led to, and now people are like talking about Mars. I mean, I I like space. I have nothing against space. I personally, I would not go to Mars in my like. I wouldn't be the guy, going to Mars, even if I had the option, because it seems like a crappy place. But people are really excited about Mars right now. Like, cool. Like, I mean, nothing against it. And on the way there, we're gonna learn a lot of technologies we can use. But my personal take is, let's just fix this planet first before we like take our baggage elsewhere. And I think it's possible to fix this planet with the problems we have here and now, without like some sort of major nuclear or like some sort of biological destruction. I think it's possible, but But now everyone's talking about Mars, and that's because like Elon's great at riding the trend, and that's awesome. I like respect that tremendously.
Well, that's cool. So maybe your the project you're working on would be able to detect those before they become huge movements, maybe. And I
Yeah,
don't know if you're thinking like a financial side or marketing side or product. You could could help people build better products. It's like
could
probably a
be
lot of
all
use
of them.
cases for that.
Yeah, it could be on those because that's the thing with MarketMuse. We see like new topics. People are trying to coin a new topic, and to do that, you really have to, write a lot of content is one thing, but there also needs to be this kind of like movement, this acceleration. And there are topics, like new topics being created all the time and new concepts. It gets back to that educating the consumer idea. It's like, there are like just great ideas that come up and then people learn about them, like Blue Apron or something, or home, whatever that industry is called, home prep meal kits or whatever. But anyway, I just know it as Blue Apron. Great idea, and so like how does that, like, what are these really good ideas that should be amplified? And then there would be presumably the converse of that. What are ideas that everybody's like gung ho about that are actually probably really bad and we should move on? Like Vibrams. like run the
I forgot
Vibram,
about those.
the
Yeah,
shoe that gives you the
toe
plantar
shoes.
fasciitis. Yeah, the toe shoes that make you injured, like makes everyone injured. Should move on from that idea.
That's yeah, I read that. Yeah, there was a book actually that launched that, or is it a
Mhm.
book that
Oh yeah, the Born to
launched the
Run.
movement.
Yeah, I
Born to
read
Run.
it.
Yeah,
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 I read it,
great
and then
book.
I
And I
saw
was
like
totally
the
convinced that it was the
yeah.
future. But you're right. Now looking back like 5 years, you're like, where are all those toeless shoes? I mean, toe full shoes, I guess. Where are all those toed shoes? That's
Yeah.
funny. I had completely forgotten. I'm glad you brought that back up. Cool. So, I think we're kind of coming up on time. I have one pet question that I like to ask people at like dinner parties and also on the podcast, if I may. It's weird, but do you have any weird or unique or interesting hobbies
Mm,
or superstitions or things that you do kind of regularly, ideally related to work, but related to anything that people would find surprising? It's a tough
gosh.
question.
I mean, well, obviously I'm a nerd, so I do nerd things like play magic cards.
Oh, there you
Uh,
go.
But magic is great because, it doesn't require drinking. So there's no alcohol. You want like, so like when you're really bored, like in COVID, everyone's sitting around, you just start drinking. This does not require drinking. It doesn't use computer screens, so it's easy on your eyes. TV and everything else like seems to require a screen. So magic's kind of fun. Another thing that I just got into the other day, I mean, this is like, I mean, I'm into like all sorts of weird stuff. Of course I am. But a thing that I just figured out the other day is I was lying in bed like last weekend, and I'm like, it was like a good because on Saturdays I try to think about like what am I not thinking about, like what is something that is awesome that I is not in my routine, and like what else is out there that's really cool. And so like it's kind of discovery mode. And so I was like just lying in bed and I'm like, it was a really cool game back in the day. Have you ever played the game Total Annihilation?
No, what is that? It sounds
It, it,
familiar.
it was like a long time. It's back in the Command and Conquer day. It's a real-time strategy game.
Okay, I think I've
Yeah,
seen my friends played that. I don't know if I've played it, but I've seen it.
yeah, you have like different like bots, vehicles, and air things, and they're like robots. So you're basically building robots. And like that was a really cool game. And I started searching it, and it turns out that there's a new version of it that came out in 2019 called
Oh,
Planetary Annihilation. And it's like you're basically building robots and fighting other robot commanders. But I really like the message of the game. That's why it came to me when you asked. Basically, like you're like a robot that like builds other robots. And so one day
ah,
you just awaken from like sleep mode, and you're a robot, and your mission is to build more robots, and then they build more robots. And you're fighting against commanders that have also been programmed to build more bots. And you're just fighting for resources, and you're just trying to build more bots. And everyone's trying to build more bots. And there's just some sort of engineering technocratic worldview.
Yeah,
And
there's some
oh yeah,
social commentary in there for sure.
there's some comment, and there's only two resources: metal and energy, and everything can be reclaimed for metal, like trees, and like if like your unit explodes, you can reclaim for metal. Everything can be reclaimed for metal, and then there's energy that you build through like solar plants and stuff. And that's it. So there's only metal and energy, and you're a bot, and they're bots, and everyone's just building more robots. And there's just something philosophically, you know, interesting there that I haven't got my head wrapped
It's
around.
perhaps a little dystopian. Yeah, it's like maybe we're
Incredibly,
headed in that direction. Yeah, let's hope not. That's
right?
cool, man.
It's like the difference between like Facebook and Google, you know? It's like, for me, I'm obviously a fan of Google.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think nowadays that's not an uncommon. People definitely seem to prefer Google over Facebook by far, at least in the average. If I were to just extrapolate the average, but that's awesome, dude. Thank you for sharing all that. That was huge. I think the audience is gonna love hearing from from their perspective, right? People who kind of just work in advertising agencies or at brands or whatever. This is I wouldn't say niche, but a very specific technology for a very important but specific use case. And I bet we went so deep that I bet these people are going to be very excited to hear. So thank you for coming on the podcast. At some point, whatever comes next, we'll maybe have you back on. But in the meantime, it's been really good having you, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So if you enjoyed that podcast, if you like creativity and topics like that, or if you work in a creative field, you'll definitely love the IAA, the International Advertising Association. You should check them out at iaaglobal.org. The IAA is one of the oldest running since 1938 associations for creative professionals, and is currently acting as the global compass, sharing information like this, gathering cool minds like you've just seen to chat and to understand exactly what's happening today. So I encourage you to go check them out, iaaglobal.org.